All right. We are live 2024.
Welcome to OZ NewsHour. I'm Andy Hagans here with Jimmy Atkinson. Today is January 2nd, 2024, and we are covering the most important stories in the world of opportunity zones.
We're talking about opportunity zones. We're talking about opportunity zones.
Jimmy, Happy New Year, man. You came prepared today.
Andy, Happy New Year, pal. Did you not get your hats and glasses? It's New Year's Day, man, or it's the day after New Year's anyway. I'm fired up for 2024. We're going to make it the best year ever for opportunity zones, if you ask me.
Well, where's
what do you got for us today, Andy?
Where's my party favors? Yours look great, man. You didn't send me any.
They're at the corporate office. I guess you didn't pick them up.
Did you stay up late? Did you watch the ball drop?
I did not stay up late. My wife and I were in bed shortly after 11 p.m. That's about as much as we could stomach. And that we were only up that late because the baby kept us up.
I was going to say that's life with the newborn. You sleep
That's
when
right.
you can sleep, right?
That's right.
Well, what do you think, big picture, before we dive into the first story? Is 2024, what kind of year is it going to be in the world of opportunity zones? Is it a transitional year? Is it going to be a revolutionary year? Is it going to be the year where the program gets extended? What do you think? Big picture.
I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic that it's the year it gets extended. But realistically, I kind of think the ship has sailed on the legislation going into effect and extending opportunity zones. Probably that's going to get pushed back to 2025 now at this point. There's still a window of opportunity where something could happen here in the first few months of the year prior to April, but we're kind of gearing up for an election year here, and it's really hard to get bipartisan anything bipartisan done in Congress in a presidential election year. So, if I'm being realistic, I'm thinking at this point it's looking like toward the end of 2025 is when a lot of this stuff is going to have to happen. I would say overall, it is a pivotal year for opportunity zones. Just because we had a massive year for capital gains last year, despite economic uncertainty, high interest rates, despite negative investor sentiment. The S&P 500 hit new highs or is close to new highs.
Right.
The Dow hit new highs or is very close to new highs. I mean, the stock market was way up last year. There's got to be some capital gains locked away in the stock market. I know transaction volume is down on the M&A side and on the real estate side, but if you're a stock market investor, you got to have some low basis, highly appreciated stock. And if you want to take some chips off the table, I think 2024 might be a good year to do so. And then why not plow some of those gains into opportunity zones, Andy? So I do think it's a pivotal year in that regard, particularly for stock market investors.
I like it. So even though things are a little bit quiet on the real estate front, not that quiet, by the way, but a little bit quiet, it could still be a pivotal year because, as you say, there's this kind of underreported tailwind of a metric, ton full of capital gains sitting around, which is great. That's music to the ears, I'm sure, of every OZ sponsor, as well as good for investors, right? Because most of us are invested in the stock market. But let me transition us to our first story today. I think this is a pretty exciting one. I love industrial real estate. I know it's one of the most popular real estate categories that you and I get asked about over and over from our user base, from our newsletter list, also on YouTube. There's a ton of talk about it, which is industrial real estate. And GTIS has announced their third opportunity zone investment with Call It Industrial in South Carolina. And Jimmy, they're going big, right? So this is a joint venture that is acquiring a 107-acre site located in the I-85 South submarket of Charlotte in Cherokee County, South Carolina. And so the site, it's obviously an opportunity zone within the Charlotte MSA, and it's expected to be developed into approximately 850,000 to 930,000 square feet of industrial warehouse space across 2 phases. Jimmy, that is pretty darn big. They're going big.
They are going big. This is the darling sector of the last few years, as Peter Saganek of GTIS Partners, good friend of mine, likes to say, or he's been telling me that story at least for the past few years, and I believe him. COVID accelerated this demand for this type of real estate, this logistics, industrial warehouse, distribution center real estate, with the further rise and acceleration of e-commerce. Amazon and all of Amazon's competitors who are shipping globally and domestically within the US, they need a place to store all their stuff. And it's not always at retail centers anymore where you need to hold a lot of inventory, but rather at these industrial logistics warehouse facilities that are spread strategically all over the country. GTIS Partners, their OZ fund is focused on two sectors. One is multifamily, and two is this industrial sector. So you're right, Andy, they are going big in industrial. It's the headline for today's OZ NewsHour. GTIS goes big with industrial, and I don't think anybody's going bigger than GTIS Partners is with this one. I should disclose, by the way, that GTIS Partners is a sponsor of OZ Pitch Days, and they did participate in our last OZ Pitch Day event. If anybody's interested in learning more about that, they can head to ozpitchday.com. I'm pulling it up right now. And GTIS Partners presented this investment opportunity, Sunbelt Residential and Industrial, right here. I'm sharing it on the screen right now. It's one of the larger opportunity zone funds in the space. They raised $630 million with their initial fund a couple of years back. This one focused in the same space in the Sunbelt, industrial and residential, multi-asset portfolio of properties in these two booming sectors in the booming area of the country that is the Sunbelt. And they're raising, I believe it's $500 million or more for this particular fund, Andy.
And that's how you get 900,000 square feet, right? I mean, these are big, bold projects. I mean, those are big funds, but they're multi-asset funds. So, I mean, sometimes as a real estate investor, you can kind of get into the habit of, trying to turn over every rock and find the little undiscovered niche or whatever. And it's like, you know what? This just makes sense on an intuitive level. Sunbelt, multifamily, industrial, growth. With an OZ fund, you're locked in for 10 years, right? So you want to be, you're not looking for something that's going to pay off in 12 or 18 months or like a little flip. You need tailwinds, big tailwinds that can drive your investment forward over a long period of time because of that 10-year hold. So it makes sense to me. I remember the pitch at this last pitch day that I attended, of course, and there was just a lot of interaction and Q&A and engagement with the GTIS presentation. So I know that, again, there's a lot of interest in industrial from our list. So any sponsors or would-be sponsors who are thinking about industrial, take it from us. There is a lot of appetite for industrial, and I think that's going to remain the case for the foreseeable future.
I think that's right, Andy. I think, multifamily and industrial are two sectors that continue to have great tailwinds. I would throw self-storage in there too as another one that has some pretty strong tailwinds at its back. A couple of the other bigger sectors, I would say hotel and office, still getting a little bit hammered by COVID, not quite as badly as they might have been in 2020. There's like hints that hotel is coming back. Office still seems to be struggling a little bit, but industrial and multifamily and self-storage, those three sectors I'm pretty bullish on for 2024 in the short term, but then in general, mid to long term over the next 10 plus years, I think there's some great tailwinds for all three of those sectors, Andy.
Absolutely. Talking about back to the beginning of the show where I asked you what was your theme for the year, you said it could still be a pivotal year. You don't expect the legislation necessarily to get extended this year for various reasons that we can talk about here in a minute. But it's still going to be a pivotal year. I mean, there are still projects happening. Capital is still being raised. To your point, there's a ton of capital gains still sitting on the sidelines. So there's still a lot going on in the world of opportunity zones, right? For those of us who are involved, it seems like the pace of activity hasn't really slowed down, which is awesome. It's just awesome to be a part of this community. On that note, I think this is good news. Our second story, to me, this is always good news. And we have someone in Washington who is talking about opportunity zones because even
must have heard our jingle, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, even if here's the thing, if and when the legislation gets extended and renewed, which I believe it will, it's not like we just get lucky and there's a 48-hour window and suddenly everything goes our way and they pass it. It's a coordinated multi-month, multi-year effort that just culminates in the passing of the legislation. And so it's important that along the way we announce when projects are successful. And it's also important that we build up voices in Washington, D.C. and in states around the nation expressing support and talking about the victories and the successes that have been achieved by the program. So our second story, Tax Subcommittee Chairman Kelly released this opening statement where he talked about in depth opportunity zones and really how successful they've been. And Jimmy, if it's okay with you, I just want to read some of his statement, right? So this is right from Representative Mike Kelly, who's a representative from Pennsylvania. He's chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee's subcommittee on tax. And so this was part of his statement that highlighted OZ's successes. So, quote, to highlight an important part for my constituents, in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act created opportunity zones, a bipartisan idea that has transformed communities across the country, especially in my home district in Erie, Pennsylvania. With the right mix of hometown people and business leaders, the Erie Downtown Development Corporation hit the ground running in 2019, breaking ground in what was at the time the poorest zip code in America. By the way, wow, I mean, that's great PR for opportunity zones to have a success story in the poorest zip code in America. But going on with the quote, opportunity zones like the one in Erie, Pennsylvania have led to unimaginable growth. Opportunity zone investment reached almost 4,000 communities through its first 2 years. This is nearly half of the total number of designated opportunity zone communities across the country. My home state of Pennsylvania saw 132 communities. 44% of the opportunity zones in the state receive investments through the end of 2020. Opportunity zones created growth, and opportunity zone investment is going to communities that are substantially more economically distressed than the rest of the country. End quote from Representative Mike Kelly. Jimmy, I wish every member of Congress would talk about the OZ program like Mike Kelly has.
Yeah, Mike Kelly's been a huge champion of the program since the very beginning. It's great to see him take the lead on this here. When this legislation got introduced during this session of Congress back last fall, Andy, it got introduced through the House Ways and Means Committee, and Representative Kelly is a important member of that committee, and he is the chairman of the subcommittee on tax policy. So all of this, by the way, Andy, is part of a, like you mentioned before, multi-month, multi-year effort to not just espouse the virtues of opportunity zones, but in fact of the entire Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. A lot of his speech was about opportunity zones, but within the broader context of President Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that were enacted at the end of 2017, a lot of the provisions within that TCJA are actually expiring at the end of 2025. Now, some of the provisions of that TCJA don't expire until the end of 2026. And opportunity zones is one of those many provisions that has that 2026 end date. This is why I think, Andy, by the way, that probably 2025 is a more likely target for opportunity zones and a number of other provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to finally get reformed and extended. Some of them might be made permanent or at least extended for a year or two. Opportunity zones hopefully become one of those provisions within the TCJA that are extended for at least a couple of years, hopefully by the end of next year. So maybe about 23 and a half months from today, Andy, is when I think it's probably most likely we'll see something like that go through. And that would renew not just opportunity zones, but a number of provisions within the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We don't have time to dissect all of those today, but opportunity zones, a small part of that, Andy.
Yeah, Jimmy, if I could just, complain for a minute. It's
Please.
just annoying that Congress leaves everything to the last minute. I mean, to your point, we are believers that this will be reformed and extended, that the OZ program will go on, be made permanent, or at least, indefinite and, renewed again and again. It's unfortunate the way that our legislative body works, that a lot of these things get left to the last minute. And then you have the leverage and the sense of urgency, to get the vote and to whip the vote, to pass the legislation. And I'm just not very patient, I'm like, I want it to be extended now. But one question I had for you, because you're more plugged into, the political drama around this program and some of the key players on Capitol Hill. Who are the major, who's like my top 10, who's my short list of senators and House representatives that are real champions of the OZ program, like our top allies on Capitol Hill? Who are they?
On the Senate side, there's really two main champions of the program that have been champions of the program since before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was enacted. I mean, we're going all the way back to 2015, and that would be Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, and Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina. Those are two senators that have really been driving this forward on the Senate side. On the House side, Representative Mike Kelly, the main proponent of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and now of the newly reintroduced Opportunity Zones Improvement, Transparency, and Extension Act. I'm just kind of zooming into this article that I wrote on this legislation that was introduced last fall, Andy. You can see the co-sponsors here are Representatives Mike Kelly, which we were just talking about. He had that speech at the House Ways and Means Committee last month. But in addition to Senator Kelly, also on the Republican side is Carol Miller. And then on the Democrat side are Daniel Kildee and Terry Sewell. Terry Sewell, by the way, I would say has probably been the strongest advocate among Democrats on the House side. She absolutely loves Opportunity Zone. She's been a very influential leader and supporter of Opportunity Zones on the House side. This
and
article,
Michigan, Jimmy,
way,
sorry to interject. I have to give a little rah-rah for Michigan. And, I'm kind of noticing that those, at least in the House, those two states, Michigan and Alabama, those are not deep blue states or anything, right? So it's maybe a little bit more of these kind of center left, centrist leaning districts, even if they're blue districts, where these representatives are maybe more comfortable really championing the OZ program.
Oh, there might be something to it. Let's see who else is on here though. Andy, let's see.
Like, I don't see the squad. I don't see the squad represented.
I don't think the squad's coming out and supporting this. But yeah, I think it's more of, it really does. This type of program really does appeal more to the center, I think, and can kind of draw from both the left and the right, but might not quite attract in fringe members from either party. I would say, let's see, there were some additional co-sponsors that were added to the bill in November. That included Nicole Maliotakis, Republican from New York, Guy Rensselaer from Pennsylvania, Jefferson Van Drew from New Jersey, and Vern Buchanan from Florida. So those are all Republicans. By the way, when they initially introduced the OZ legislation back in 2015, 16, 17, those years before it was enacted as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, they brought him in 2 by 2, just like Noah's Ark. they brought in, they had to bring in a Republican and a Democrat just to make sure, just to drive the point home that this truly was a bipartisan effort.
And it still is bipartisan, Jimmy, but it's not 50-50, at least in terms of numbers. And I'm always on dangerous ground when I opine or theorize, but one does wonder, if on the Democrat side, if there's a concern that, we don't want to champion anything that was signed into law by Trump or that is related to Trump. We don't want to call anything related to Donald Trump's presidency a success in any way, shape, or form, regardless of what we might think about the underlying philosophy of the program or whatever, because that kind of gives Trump a win. And that's the last thing that we might want to do, right? So I think there may be that kind of element in 2024 that wasn't there maybe when this was initially passed.
I think there is some truth to that, Andy. And the fact of the matter is, although the Opportunity Zone legislation had broad bipartisan support, once the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act landed on everyone's desk to vote on, it was split along party lines. 0 Democrats voted for it. All of the Republicans voted for it. It's a very Republican tax bill that was passed. Now, the one provision in it that we all love and talk about every week and every month with you, Andy, Opportunity Zones, that does hold a lot of bipartisan support, but it is.
Well, I love the whole, I think I love the whole act, Jimmy, or almost all of it, just for the record. I like the whole thing, but especially relevant to this show, Opportunity Zone.
Absolutely, Andy. And you know, a lot of these Republican members of Congress are pushing to get the whole thing, or at least much of the whole thing, renewed prior to the end of 2025. Opportunity Zones, one small part of that, big part of it for you and me and our listeners, our audience, Andy. But at the end of the day, it's a relatively small chip on the table, all else being equal.
Well, let's all just a couple notes, then we can move on to our next story. One is,
I did just bring up the current list of co-sponsors because we had one more added, another Republican in December. But yeah, right now we're sitting at just 2 Democrat co-sponsors and 7 Republican co-sponsors.
Well, but at least it's still bipartisan, so that's something. And Mike, Mike Kelly, who is well, first of all, the House Ways and Means Committee. It's a very powerful committee in Congress. You know, if you're into politics or into watching legislation get introduced and negotiate, that's a very powerful committee. And the subcommittee on tax, that's a powerful subcommittee. So he's a very key person, a powerful representative to be championing this. And another tip of the cap would be Senator Booker. Kind of to what we were discussing, it's probably a little less politically popular to champion this right now on the Democrat side of the aisle. So the fact that Senator Booker is still championing this legislation and is still, sort of on our side as Opportunity Zone advocates, that's no small thing. Like he's an important ally in the Senate. And sometimes, the Senate, it works a little differently than the House in the sense that obviously the House can be a little more chaotic seeming sometimes, but with the caucuses, but also, I think some senators are a little bit more willing to be independent. They aren't running for re-election every 2 years. They're sometimes are a little bit more willing to stake out their own ground in opposition to their parties. But either way, I think Senator Booker's support is huge. And, fingers crossed that we can make a push over the next 23 and a half months, to your point, Jimmy, and get as many bipartisan supporters on both sides of the aisle behind this and talking about it. Because the fact that it is successful, it has been successful. There have been numerous, literally hundreds of successful projects already behind us, and we have mountains and mountains of data to prove it that we've covered on this program. That's the thing we need to be saying over and over, right? Because I think that's what really convinces people at the end of the day. Any closing words, Jimmy?
Well, just one closing thought is the probably the key member of the Senate that needs to be swayed toward our side.
Oh no!
I know. It would be Ron Wyden.
He hates
Democrat,
us. He hates OZs.
Democrat from Oregon. Well, the problem is, though, he is the chairman of the Finance Committee. So it'd be very key pickup to add him. Otherwise,
hey, do we have any listeners in Oregon? Because, a letter or phone call from a constituent is weighted a lot more heavily than just a bunch of randos from all over the country. So if you're a listener or viewer in Oregon, please, by all means, send a letter or just get on the phone.
Pick up the phone. Talk to Senator Wyden. Tell him what you think about Opportunity
Well, talk to his staff, sure. Moving on, Jimmy, our third story for today is our upcoming masterclass at OZ Insiders. The masterclass is on Opportunity Zone PPMs and subscription docs. But before we talk about this class, Jimmy, for any of our listeners or viewers who aren't familiar with OZ Insiders, could you give us a brief introduction to this community?
Yeah, OZ Insiders, it's our brand new Opportunity Zone mastermind community structured around Opportunity Zone professionals and executives, particularly high performing Opportunity Zone professionals and executives and high net worth and ultra high net worth investors who want to take their Opportunity Zone strategy to the next level. So whether you're an investor looking at deals and trying to vet them, or maybe you have your own QOF and you're trying to source deals or structure deals, maybe you're an attorney or an accountant who has a specialization within Opportunity Zones. Maybe you are a fund manager trying to raise equity from outside investors. Whoever you are within the Opportunity Zone space, if you're a high performing person, the one thing we all have in common is we're all trying to take the next step forward with our Opportunity Zone strategy and develop best practices within the Opportunity Zones. We have a tremendous community of several dozen Opportunity Zone executives and investors now as members within our group. OZinsiders.com is the place to go to learn more about it. And, we're having a lot of fun in there. And, as part of what we do, in addition to our private chat group and the onboarding call that we do, we also host a monthly meeting and a monthly masterclass that goes deep on one particular topic within Opportunity Zone. So Andy, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about this month's upcoming class.
Yeah, great summary, Jimmy. And I think you nailed it. We are a private community, and I think we're the best one in the Opportunity Zone space. So this month's masterclass is being presented by Andrew Daup of Syndication Counsel, LLC. So Andrew is very, very experienced and knowledgeable and friendly attorney in this space, in the space of, private investments and specifically Opportunity Zones. We're going to walk through, it's going to be like a workshop of how to create, the decisions you make and the inputs needed to create Opportunity Zone PPM and subscription documents. I think it's going to be fun. We kind of workshopped it like a scenario that we're going to walk everybody through. So it'll be kind of a learn as we go, kind of doing it in real time. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And I also want to mention our update since our, last episode of this podcast. We also held our last masterclass was on structuring OZ deals, and that was with Ashley Tyson. And these two masterclasses, to me, they're really kind of like a 1-2 punch because Ashley did a fantastic job of walking through the best practices to structure a deal, to set up a deal. And so it's kind of like that's the theory or the groundwork, the underlying decisions you make. And then now, once you've done that, once you've structured your deal, it's time to put together the offering documents, presuming that you're raising external capital. So these two pieces of content, I think they're just going to be fantastic to add to our library. We hold these live, but we also record them so that anyone can view them on demand later. And I think this one with Andrew Daup coming up this coming Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern time is going to be fantastic. I'm very excited for that. Any other words on this, Jimmy?
My only other word would be, please do. If you're interested in joining us live on January 8th and you're not already a member of OZ Insiders, you can join today by heading to OZinsiders.com. If you join after January 8th, obviously you won't be able to attend live. You won't be able to interact with us, but we do record all of our master classes and they're always available to watch on demand for our members only. So these are available inside of your members only dashboard after you join OZ Insiders. That's all I got, Andy, on OZ Insiders.
I love it, but I got to give my plug. Do attend live if you can, because we always have very spirited discussions, just a lot of good stuff in the chat, because it's just great to be in a community of people who get it, who are passionate about OZs. Speaking of being passionate for OZs, Jimmy, we have a couple tips of the cap. Tips of the caps for
tips of the caps, because my cap is different than your cap.
Okay, for our next two stories. So this Cityview is a big name, Jimmy. So the headline here: Cityview reveals name for 378 unit Opportunity Zone project in Oakland's Brooklyn Basin. So tip of the cap to Cityview. So they unveiled the name as Portico, and it's slated to complete in December 2023, which I guess has passed now. And the project was designed to meet LEED Silver standards and is a premier waterfront community in Brooklyn Basin's master planned community. The 8-story project will feature a mix of studio, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments, as well as townhomes, with more than 80% of the units overlooking the water. Wow, that sounds pretty sweet.
Hmm.
Featuring a prime waterfront location in the fast-growing Brooklyn Basin community, Portico will offer extensive amenities and easy access to everything the area has to offer, says Sean Burton, CEO of Cityview. We are proud to have leveraged our vertically integrated platform and extensive experience developing an opportunity zones to bring nearly 400 units of additional housing to the Bay Area. Very much needed housing to the Bay Area, Jimmy. I know OZ Pitch Day, we always get to talk about this a little bit during the Urban Catalyst presentation, that, the Bay Area has such a shortage of housing. So this is a really cool announcement, and it sounds like an awesome place to live.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. I brought up the Urban Catalyst pitch right here. I know this is supposed to be about Cityview, but they're kind of doing similar things in a similar area. Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, it's great because of all of the jobs that area has created with the tech industry over the past 20 plus years, but they're creating jobs much, much quicker than they're able to create housing, in part because of all the red tape that it takes to go through to create housing in California, and particularly in that area of California, Andy. But they're managing to do it a little bit and put a dent in both Urban Catalyst and Cityview and other developers in the area. They're doing the best they can, but it's hard to build enough housing there in the Bay Area for sure, Andy.
Well,
So this is great.
a pretty big dent. Yeah. And Jimmy, man, check this out. Lower in the article, if you go down, there's a link to porticowaterfront.com.
Okay.
Check out this
Should I click this?
Oh yeah. I mean, get it on screen. This
Okay.
pool and this view.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, wow, I want to live in this place. Look at that.
It's pretty
Look at
nifty.
that. Yeah, I mean, you hear
It's like right on
Oakland.
the marina here. You got some sailboats in the background here.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
This looks pretty nice. Let me check out the amenities real quick. These guys might be convincing me to move to
Yeah,
Oakland.
let's see are you gonna move here later today?
All right, we got a fitness space. We got the pool and spa deck. I mean, that is the
Outdoor lounge.
You look at that view
clubhouse.
from the
They got
lounge.
some
though.
shuffleboard. It's a pretty
The-
cool shuffleboard table there.
I did not know that Oakland had this picturesque of a waterfront.
A lot of it's on water. Yeah, it's right on the bay.
Today I learned. Well,
They
if you
just
guys
don't know what to do with it a lot of the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, if y'all are listening to the audio version of the show, and so you didn't see what we just brought up on the screen, check out porticowaterfront.com to see this very impressive project. So congrats to Cityview. And another tip of the cap is due to Griffin Capital, who has broken ground on their multifamily development in a Maryland opportunity zone. Jimmy, how long have you known Griffin Capital?
I met Kevin Shields, the Griffin Capital CEO, I want to say in 2020 or 2021. Visited his office. Kind of a fun fact, his offices are in El Segundo, just like a mile from my brother's house. So I'm out there pretty frequently. And Kevin was very gracious with his time early on, kind of teaching me about real estate investing and opportunity zones in general when I was kind of getting up to speed in 2020. So really grateful for the time and attention that he gave me, because he's a really big player in the private equity real estate space. They've been doing it for a really long time, and they've got some big OZ funds that they've rolled out the past few years.
Well, yeah, and Jimmy, to your point, Griffin Capital is a big player, which I knew, but I did not realize, in this article, they've raised over $1.5 billion to date across their different qualified opportunity zone funds. I did not know that they were that big of a player in opportunity zone funds. That is,
They've got $23 billion in assets under management, right? So little chunk of that in its QOZ program. Pretty cool.
Yeah. But this looks like another cool project, from the mock-ups, from the photos. But just our tip of the cap to Griffin Capital for this milestone and really for everything they've achieved to date in our space, in the OZ space. Jimmy, that brings us to our last story of the week, of the month, which is StarPoint Properties. So this is another sponsor that I know that you know pretty well. They are beginning vertical construction for Lotus Point in Mesa, Arizona. So if I could, I'll just I'll just read a little bit from the press release to give everybody the details here. So StarPoint Properties announced that they are under construction on the 2 Opportunity Zone projects totaling $115 million. StarPoint commenced vertical construction for 2 Opportunity Zone funds, Lotus Point, a $79 million multifamily development located in Mesa, Arizona, and Point Central, a $36 million industrial development in Denver, Colorado. As a result of StarPoint's 25-year plus track record and legacy of long-term relationships with high net worth investors, the firm was able to expediently raise the equity from a combination of existing and new investors. Yay for capital raising. Quote, as a result of the development's Opportunity Zone designations, our investors will realize significant tax benefits, said StarPoint CEO and founder Paul Danestrad.
Danestrad, yeah, you got it.
Danestrad. Let me finish with the press release here. Taylor Trotloff led the equity raise for both Lotus Point and Point Central, noting that, quote, investor interest came from a mix of real estate investors who elected to do more Opportunity Zone projects over a 1031 exchange, and tech investors and business owners who realized a capital gain. So congrats to Paul as well as to Taylor Trotloff, our friend there over at StarPoint, for another successful capital raise and now beginning vertical construction, which is always very exciting.
Yeah, can't say enough good things about Taylor Trotloff, the effort that she's put in, the work that she's done over the past year plus at StarPoint Properties. And Andy, I think like it's really cool. When I first started covering the Opportunity Zones industry in 2018, excuse me, nothing was getting built, right? Like it was all just kind of like pie in the sky stuff. Like there were a lot of mock-ups, and there were a lot of IRR projections, a lot of pro formas, a lot of pitch decks floating around, a lot of blind pool funds. But now here we are 5.5 years later, and it's like, this is under construction, that's under construction. StarPoint Properties, Cityview, Griffin Capital, GTIS, all this stuff is actually going ground up. A lot of these projects are getting started on construction, or some of them are even completing construction. It's really cool it's really cool to see a lot of these projects actually come to fruition now, 5.5 years into the program.
Yeah, I here in Michigan, we have white pines, right? They're our native tree, essentially. State used to be covered in them until they all got chopped down like 150 years ago. That's a long whole story. But anyway, to make the long story short, I planted a bunch of pine trees on our property here 5 or 6 years ago, right? And it's kind of like, someday these will be big, tall trees. Well, white pines grow really fast. They grow like 2 feet a year. Wow. And so now I've woken up 5 years later and I'm like, whoa, I got some tall pine trees in my backyard, right? So same concept here. You were early into covering the OZ beat, right? But it was all drawings and mock-ups and plans and announcements. And now it's buildings and tenants and everything is, a lot of these initial projects have come to fruition or are coming to fruition. And it's cool to see, right? It kind of makes you feel old a little bit, doesn't it, Jimmy?
Kind of makes me feel like I'm in the right space, Andy, is how I would put it. This one in particular, the Lotus Point one's really cool because I remember Taylor was just rounding out the capital raise for this one back at, I think it was our summer OZ pitch day. I don't think they presented this one at fall because I think they had completed the fundraising, and now it's great to see that it's under construction.
Absolutely. Well, we are 40 minutes into this episode approximately, and Jimmy, it is time for our pick of the month. I'll let you go first. What is the story, podcast, video, any piece of content that you think our audience needs to know about this month in the world of opportunity?
Well, my pick of the month, and maybe it's also a tip of the cap, is to Monterey Globe and my friends over there, Tess Young and Brian England. They had a big development just last month, Andy. They got to present their project in front of the City of Globe's zoning commission, and I'm happy to report that their project was unanimously approved by that city council in Globe. So they're going to be able to break ground on that later this year, I believe. That was a huge step that they had to get over, huge hurdle they had to clear, I should say. One of the more interesting things that they had to do, Andy, was they had to they're trying to build above what the city code currently restricts. I think this is going to be I can't remember if it's a 7 or an 8-story building. Forgive me, Tess and Brian, I've forgotten some of the details, but the building was going to be taller than the city council currently allows, so they had to request special approval there. And one of the main concerns was, wait a second, our firefighters don't have a truck with a ladder high enough to service this building in case of an emergency. And Tess Young said, I promise if you guys approve this, I'll make sure that fire truck gets that ladder. We will finance that. We'll make sure that we pay for it if we have to. So the city of Globe's getting a new fire truck with a new ladder, and they're getting this great new multifamily residential building, which is near and dear to my heart. I've known these two individuals. I met them in the fall of 2023 in Phoenix, Arizona, not too far from Globe, at an Opportunity Zones conference. And this is a for-profit venture, but they also have a nonprofit arm that is going to be building some free residential housing for retired religious clergy, which is really impactful and much needed. So congratulations to Tess and Brian for clearing that big hurdle. And I wish you nothing but the best of luck and success. And I've pulled up a podcast episode that I did with this group back in October, Andy.
Absolutely. You know, Tess is such a engaging, influential, trustworthy, you know, impressive person. I on the one hand, you know, your recount of that meeting where they got approval, it's kind of funny, but I'm chuckling. I'm like, yeah, I can definitely, you know, she's and the team really at Monte Day. It's just amazing, their vision. And I think when people hear about it, it excites them. You and I talked about this project when we gave our presentation on private real estate and opportunity zones to students and law students at the University of Notre Dame. And I know that, you know, it was one of, we just mentioned a couple different OZ projects, and they really, the crowd there just loved it and had a bunch of questions about it. So awesome to get that update. And Jimmy, on the topic of your podcast, my pick of the month is your podcast episode, which, let's see, what number was that? Episode 290, Generating Tax Alpha with Opportunity Zones and More, with Clint Edgington. I'm guessing most of our listeners to this program already listen to your show, Jimmy. But in case they don't, I just want to plug it here. Jimmy's main podcast on Opportunity Zones, the Opportunity Zones podcast, it republishes OZ NewsHour, but the back catalog of all of the episodes you've published spans almost every topic that you could possibly want to talk about, know about, learn about in OZs. And at the same time, you are constantly bringing on new guests to talk about new topics in an in-depth format. And I just love that, you know, the topics that you address. And specifically with this one, you know, Clint, I thought just his points on how to keep costs low, how to generate alpha, how to do Roth IRA conversions, and just general tax efficiency type topics. I'm like, man, those are topics I just never get tired of learning more about, of hearing about. Those are literally what attracted me to the Opportunity Zones program in the first place. So kudos to you, but really more to Clint for just having great insights and bringing us another great podcast episode from your show.
Yeah, Clint was great. His main point was, hey, you can't always rely on the market to produce returns for you, but you can get returns by just heading back to the basics, keeping costs low, and seeking tax alpha, structuring things the right way, getting yourself in the right types of tax advantaged accounts and tax advantaged wrappers. Hey, here's where Opportunity Zones come into play. Here's where Roth IRA conversions come into play. Here's where every different type of thing you can do with trusts come into play. It was a pretty far-ranging episode. It's my most recent one from December 20th. We were on hiatus last week for the Christmas and New Year's holiday. This is my first podcast of the new year here, the one I'm doing with you right now, Andy. But if you want to just go back one episode, that's the one with Clint, episode number 290, Generating Tax Alpha with Opportunity Zones and More, with Clint Edgington. And thank you to Clint. Thanks, Andy, for the plug there. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I agree with Clint, or at least his philosophy as I interpret it. You know, the basics never get old. They never go out of style with investing, with tax efficient investing, with Opportunity Zones, and with real estate. And with that, Jimmy, that's it for today's show. We'll be back in 1 month with our next edition. Thank you for watching and listening. And Jimmy, thank you for joining me today, party hat and all. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, Andy. A pleasure as always. Happy New Year. Happy 2024. Let's make it the best Opportunity Zones year ever.
Happy New Year.